Every Spider-Man fan has that one game that made them feel this is it, this is what being Spider-Man is supposed to feel like. For most people, it was hearing Stan Lee welcome them to New York for the very first time, and for others, it was jumping off the Empire State Building and realizing that the webs actually attached to buildings, and some fell in love with the comic books all over again. Today, millions of players can switch between two Spider-Man without a single loading screen. But what is fascinating is that every generation believed that they had reached the ultimate Spider-Man game until another one arrived. For almost 30 years, developers have been chasing one impossible dream, which is to make you forget that you are holding a controller and convince you, even if only for a few hours, that you are Spider-Man. Some of these games came close and some completely changed the industry, while some were actually decades ahead of their time, and every single one became the foundation for the next. These aren't just random Spider-Man games, these are the 7 levels of Spider-Man games. Level 1, Spider-Man PS1. Today it is easy to laugh at the original PlayStation Spider-Man. The graphics are blocky with a draw distance that was almost non-existent. Characters had square hands and New York is hidden beneath a blanket of fog, and you would think this was a Silent Hill game. But back in 2000, this game felt like absolute magic, because before this, Spider-Man games had struggled to capture what made the character so special. Some were fun while some weren't, but none of them truly made players feel like Spider-Man before Neversoft changed everything. Ironically, the studio wasn't even known for superhero games. They were the developers behind Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, which explains the movements, momentum, and flow. Those 3 ideas became the soul of Spider-Man. Instead of feeling stiff, Peter moved with incredible speed. He flipped through the air and crawled on walls, chained together acrobatics that made players look cooler than they actually were. For the first time, Spider-Man felt athletic because Spider-Man was never really about brute strength. He was supposed to be fast, creative, and improvisational. These 3 qualities Neversoft understood. Then there was the voice acting. Neil Patrick Harris brought a youthful confidence to Peter Parker, while Stan Lee himself welcomed players into the adventure with a narration that instantly made everything feel authentic. Just hearing Stan Lee say "Welcome, true believer" was enough to make a grown man cry. But perhaps the smartest decision the developers ever made was refusing to tell another origin story. Everyone already knew Uncle Ben and the Spider-Bite, so instead, the game throws players directly into an action-packed mystery involving Dr. Octopus, Carnage, Mysterio, Rhino, Scorpio, Venom, and countless twists that constantly kept players guessing. The pacing never slowed down. One minute you were stopping a bank robbery, the next you were fighting Venom across rooftops, then escaping a giant symbiote monster while Dr. Octopus fuses with Carnage in one of the most ridiculous and unforgettable final battles of the PlayStation era. Was it over the top? Absolutely, but Spider-Man has always thrived on comic book chaos. The game balanced humor, action, and genuine tension almost perfectly. Of course, there was one major limitation: the web swinging. Because of hardware limitations, Spider-Man couldn't actually swing from buildings to buildings. Instead, his webs attached to the sky. Sure, we joked for years about invisible helicopters floating above Manhattan. Sure, it looked strange, but honestly, most of us didn't care, because the feeling of swinging through the air alone, even with imaginary anchor points, was something we'd never experienced before. Even the soundtrack amplified every chase. The boss fights felt massive, the collectibles rewarded exploration, and the costumes encouraged replayability. Even small details like Spider-Man making sarcastic jokes during combat helped players connect with Peter Parker in ways previous games never had. For millions of kids, this wasn't just another licensed game, this was Spider-Man, and it proved superhero games could be more than cheap movie tie-ins. It proved comic books deserved blockbuster treatments, and most importantly, it proved that people wanted one thing above all else: freedom. Not invisible hallways or carefully designed levels. They wanted an entire city that allowed them to swing wherever they wanted. They wanted New York itself to become the playground, and one developer listened. 4 years later, a movie changed the world, and the game that followed would completely redefine superhero games forever. Level 2, Spider-Man 2. If Level 1 taught us how to become Spider-Man, Level 2 asked a much bigger question. What if New York itself became the main character? When Spider-Man 2 launched in 2004, it didn't just improve the PS1 era, it rewrote the rules entirely. For the first time in gaming history, web swinging wasn't scripted or automatic, it was physics-based. Your webs actually attached to buildings this time and your momentum actually mattered. New York stopped being a backdrop this time around and it became a system, a living, breathing playground where movement had weight. Swinging wasn't a traversal mechanic anymore, it was freedom. You could dive from skyscrapers and catch yourself at the very last second, build momentum by chaining swings and aerial dives. You could fail, learn, and slowly become graceful in motion. Now movement itself was the reward, but Spider-Man 2 wasn't just about traversal, it really understood Peter Parker. Being Spider-Man isn't always exciting, sometimes it is exhausting. For the first time in a Spider-Man game, you weren't just saving the city, you were living in it. You had to deliver pizza across Manhattan, balance side missions with emergencies, and choose between responsibility and survival. This idea, simple as it sounds, was revolutionary at that time. This move made being Spider-Man not only about fighting villains, it showed you a different side of time, pressure, and responsibility. Then there is Dr. Octopus, one of the most iconic Spider-Man villains of all time, brought to life in a way games had never attempted before. His story wasn't just evil scientist causes chaos, it was tragedy. A man whose ambition slowly destroyed him from the inside, and by the time the final battle arrives, it doesn't feel like good versus evil, it feels personal and messy. And even today, players still remember that final confrontation, not for its difficulty, but for its emotion. Of course, none of this would matter without the city itself. New York in Spider-Man 2 felt alive in a way new open worlds had never managed at that time. Cars moved with purpose, pedestrians reacted to chaos, crimes broke out organically, and the skyline became iconic. For millions of players, this was the first time a video game city felt like a real place. But perhaps the most important legacy of Spider-Man 2 isn't what it did then, it is what it inspired. You see, every modern open world traversal system from Batman Arkham to your Sunset Overdrive to even modern Spider-Man games owes something to this particular game. It proved that movement alone could carry an entire experience. But as revolutionary as Spider-Man 2 was, it still only showed one side of the character Peter Parker. But Spider-Man has always been more than one identity, and in 2005 a game arrived that would split him in two. Level 3, Ultimate Spider-Man. If Spider-Man 2 made you feel like a hero, Ultimate Spider-Man asked a different question. What if you weren't always one? Based on the comic series by Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley, Ultimate Spider-Man didn't try to copy the movies or the previous games, it carved its own identity. And visually, it did something unique. The entire game looked like a moving comic book. Every cutscene felt like panels being drawn in real time, ink lines, bold colors, and stylized animation. It didn't aim for realism, but rather personality, and it worked. But the real twist was Venom. This was the first time in a Spider-Man game that you didn't fight Venom, you became him. This wasn't used as a cheap gameplay gimmick, it was an actual perspective shift. Suddenly, you weren't the agile, responsible Spider-Man swinging through the city, you were something heavier, slower, powerful, and more destructive. Venom didn't swing, he Hulk jumped, crashed through the streets, consumed enemies instead of defeating them, and in doing so, the game forced players to understand some uncomfortable things. Power changes how you see the world, but control is what makes you human. Peter's side of the story remained grounded, still dealing with responsibility, trying to balance life, and struggling with the weight of becoming Spider-Man. This contrast between the two made the narrative stronger than expected. This made Spider-Man not just a hero story, it now became a duality story. Control versus chaos, responsibility versus instincts, and humanity versus hunger. And while the gameplay didn't have the same technical impact as Spider-Man 2, its style and storytelling left a permanent mark. It proved Spider-Man games didn't have to look realistic to feel powerful. They just had to feel true to the character, and that idea mattered more than anyone realized because soon Spider-Man wouldn't just exist in one universe anymore, it would exist in many, and the multiverse was about to begin. Level 4, Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. Up until this game, Spider-Man games had been asking the same question. How do you make swinging better or make New York bigger, and how do you make the combat smoother? But in 2010, Shattered Dimensions asked something completely different. What if Spider-Man wasn't just one hero? This wasn't another typical Spider-Man story, this was a celebration of everything Spider-Man had ever been before. 4 universes, 4 Spider-Man, and 4 completely different ways to experience experience power. From Amazing Spider-Man to Ultimate Spider-Man, Spider-Man Noir, and Spider-Man 2099, each one brought something different, something unique to the table. This time, Spider-Man wasn't confined to one identity, tone, or world. It was a multiverse before the MCU made it mainstream. This game was already experimenting with the idea of Spider-Man that could exist in radically different forms. But the real genius wasn't the concept, it was actually the execution. Each Spider-Man felt different to play as. Amazing Spider-Man was balanced and classic. Ultimate Spider-Man leaned into raw power and aggression. Spider-Man Noir turned the entire game into stealth and shadows, while Spider-Man 2099 delivered speed, futuristic movement, and vertical combat unlike anything before it. It wasn't just variety slop, it was identity slop, and that's what made it special, because for once, you weren't just playing as Spider-Man, you were experiencing what Spider-Man could be. Each world had its own tone, atmosphere, and rules, which kept the game constantly fresh from start to finish. One moment, you were silently stalking enemies in a black and white world as Spider-Man Noir, and a few minutes later, you were soaring through the neon skies in 2099 at impossible speeds. It felt experimental, bold, and unrestricted, and even though it never redefined traversal the way Spider-Man 2 did, it expanded the idea of what Spider-Man game could contain. Spider-Man wasn't just a character anymore, he was a concept, a symbol that could be reinterpreted endlessly, and that idea would become extremely important because after years of experimentation, the franchise was about to return to its roots, but this time with everything it had learned from the past. Level 5, Marvel's Spider-Man 2018. There are moments in gaming history where everything changes, where all the years of experimentation finally converges into something definitive. For Spider-Man, that moment was 2018 when Insomniac Games took control of the franchise. They weren't trying to reinvent Spider-Man from scratch, they were trying to perfect him, and from the very first swing, you could feel it. The movement wasn't just smooth, it was elegant. Web swinging didn't just feel good, it felt complete. New York wasn't the playground anymore, it was a living city filled with personality. Pedestrians reacted to Spider-Man in real time. The city felt alive in ways previous games had hinted at, but what truly elevated the experience was Peter Parker himself. This wasn't the teenager from earlier games, this was an experienced Spider-Man, a hero who had already sacrificed so much and was still trying to hold his life together. The story leaned heavily into emotion, responsibility, loss, and the burden of someone everyone depends on. Then came the villains, Mr. Negative, Kingpin, Doc Ock, each one carefully woven into a larger narrative that constantly escalated tension. And by the time the final act arrives, the game stops feeling like a superhero adventure and becomes something closer to tragedy. Peter didn't just lose battles, he lost people, and yet he kept going because that is what Spider-Man does. But Insomniac didn't just succeed in the storytelling aspect, they also redefined the combat. They made it fluid and more acrobatic. The fights felt like choreography, dodging bullets mid-air, web zipping between enemies, and launching enemies into the sky before finishing them off in style. It was absolute cinema, and when the game ended, it didn't feel like the end of Spider-Man. It felt like the beginning of something much more bigger, because for the first time in many years, Spider-Man wasn't being interpreted by a different studio, he was being defined, and that definition would carry forward into a new generation of heroes, one that wasn't about Peter Parker anymore, but about legacy, identity, and what it means to inherit responsibility. And that's where the next level begins. Level 6, Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales. After Marvel's Spider-Man 2018, Insomniac had already proven that Spider-Man wasn't broken and wasn't in need of fixing, it just needed expanding. Miles Morales wasn't just a spin-off, it was a shift in perspective, a quieter story, a colder New York, and a much more younger, inexperienced Spider-Man trying to figure out what it actually means to carry a name that already means so much. From the very first moments, you could feel the difference. The city felt quieter, snow replaced the summer heat, and the world felt more intimate and less about saving the entire city from catastrophe and more about protecting the people inside it. Miles himself wasn't Peter Parker, he was still learning and growing into a role that already demanded perfection. But what made Miles special wasn't his story, it was what he brought into the gameplay. The Venom Venom powers changed the gameplay, electric strikes and chaining together lightning attacks. Invisibility during stealth missions made encounters feel completely different. Movement was refined to feel expressive to Miles Morales, swinging felt lighter. It wasn't about replacing Peter Parker, it was about showing a different version of Spider-Man, one built on identity, culture, and legacy. And by the end, Miles doesn't just become Spider-Man, he defines what Spider-Man means for his own world, and just like that, the foundation was set for something bigger because now there were two. Level 7, Marvel's Spider-Man 2. If Spider-Man 2018 was about becoming Spider-Man and Miles Morales was about growing into it, then Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is about what happens when that responsibility is shared. This time around, players weren't just controlling one Spider-Man, they were switching between two characters, Peter Parker and Miles Morales. This approach made the world feel bigger, faster, and more chaotic. Threats now weren't personal, they were global, and the balance between the two heroes becomes the heart of the experience. But underneath the improved traversal, the map was expanded, it brought seamless switching, and we had something that made it a bit darker, the symbiote, no pun intended. And it doesn't just change Peter's abilities, it changes him slowly, until the man we have known for decades starts to slip away. This wasn't just a power upgrade, it was corruption of identity, and that's what made Spider-Man 2 so compelling, because it was no longer just about saving the city, it was about saving yourself. And on the other hand, Miles was stepping fully into his role. He was no longer the rookie, even though he felt a little bit overpowered. Now he was an equal, a second Spider-Man standing on his own. And together, they represent the future of the franchise, but also its biggest challenge. Because now Spider-Man games aren't about proving they can work, they're about proving they can keep evolving. The gameplay reaches new heights, traversal is the best it has ever been, combat is faster and more dynamic, boss fights feel cinematic in a way earlier games could only dream of, but the story remains lacking. Two Spider-Man, one city, one responsibility, and one question hanging over everything. What comes next? Looking back, it is almost impossible not to see the pattern. Every Spider-Man game believed it was the peak. The PS1 era felt like magic, Spider-Man 2 felt like peak freedom, Ultimate Spider-Man felt like identity, Shattered Dimensions was all about possibility, Marvel's Spider-Man felt like perfection, Miles Morales was refinement, and Marvel's Spider-Man 2 feels like a DLC expansion. But the truth is, Spider-Man games have never been about reaching an endpoint. They have always been about chasing something just out of reach. The perfect swing, or the perfect city, or the perfect feeling of weightlessness whenever you leap off a skyscraper and trust that the web will always catch you. As each generation gets closer and raises the bar, each time we always believe it can't possibly get better than this, and then they go and prove us wrong. And it always does get better, because Spider-Man isn't just a character you play, he is an idea that developers keep reinterpreting, which is responsibility, balance, and freedom. And as long as these ideas keep evolving, Spider-Man games will never truly end. They will always just keep moving to the next level, and for me, I believe this is the real secret. There is no final level, only the next swing, and the next city, and the next Spider-Man. But hey, that's just me. Let me know your thoughts about the video. What do you think about the 7 levels of Spider-Man? And what did you think about the Spider-Man games from each era? What did you love about previous Spider-Man games? And which is your favorite Spider-Man games among all of this? Let me know everything you think and thought, as I'll be waiting for you guys in the comment section. Please, if you enjoyed this video, kindly hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell icon so you can get notified when I upload videos like this. And until next time, peace and love.
Incredible.